The storm didn't begin with thunder. It started with silence. A silence that echoed in the heart of a factory, where a machine meant to power progress had instead become a harbinger of collapse. Since its arrival, the new wood press had failed more than it had functioned. Its towering frame stood at the center of the workshop like a mechanical corpse, radiating nothing but unreliability. It groaned, sputtered, then died again and again, forcing workers to scramble and managers to divert shipment just to stay afloat. The company bled time, money, and morale, all because of a decision that once seemed like a breakthrough. But that machine wasn't the true problem. It was just the first crack in a dam built on secrets. And James saw it. Not all at once, but in fragments. In the way orders were mishandled. In how whispers about deals gone wrong spread like a quiet virus. Something deeper was wrong. And James, with the kind of patience only born from years of discipline and betrayal, started pulling at the thread. By the time the machine was condemned, sold for parts, and replaced with something newer and more trustworthy, James had already unearthed something far worse than faulty hardware. Numbers didn't match. Inventory disappeared. Emails seemed to vanish from the system. And while most chalked it up to pressure or incompetence, James knew better. Someone was bleeding the company from the inside. He didn't have to look far. The patterns all pointed to one name. Someone with access, with influence, and with a past polished just enough to escape suspicion. But what made it unbearable was that the name belonged to Diep's father, the same man who once toasted James during a company anniversary, the same man who smiled and nodded and made everyone feel safe. And now, the man quietly orchestrating the company's collapse. James had seen this kind of betrayal before, but never this close. Diep was the last person who deserved this. She had come back from her studies full of fire, ready to step in and rebuild what others had allowed to decay. She worked late, checked every number, stood up when others cowered, and she had no idea. Not about the machine, not about the missing funds, and certainly not about the man she still called family. James didn't want to be the one to tell her, but he also couldn't be the one to stay silent, because the last time he had stayed silent, people got hurt. And this time, people already had. The workers whose salaries were delayed, the orders that ruined client trust, the families who depended on stability, the ones like his mother, who once told him that silence was its own kind of violence. James remembered that. The decision to report it wasn't easy. There were meetings, long, cold, filled with voices that cracked under pressure. Some wanted to cover it up, sweep it under corporate rugs, protect reputations. But James stood firm. He brought the evidence, he laid out the trail, and when it was time to choose between comfort and truth, he made the harder choice. The board backed him, slowly, uneasily. But they did. There would be no deals, no forgiveness, only accountability. And as the process unfolded, Diep found out, not through whispers, but through watching it happen. And James saw the way her eyes changed, like the moment glass shatters. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. She didn't ask James for details. She didn't beg him to stop, but he saw what it did to her. The way her steps became heavier, the way she avoided the corner office where her father used to sit. She carried herself with grace, but inside, something had cracked, and the worst was yet to come. Because just when it seemed like the damage had a name, another fracture appeared. This time not in the company, but in Diep's past. A relative arrived unannounced, carrying papers and photos that didn't belong to the narrative Diep had lived her whole life. Her parents, she was told, weren't dead. They hadn't died when she was 2. They were alive, out there, somewhere. And the man she had trusted, the man who raised her, had built that lie to keep them apart. No explanation, no justification, just silence, and 2 decades of it. James didn't ask what she felt. He already knew. Anger, confusion, betrayal, layered so thick it suffocated. But Diep didn't scream. She went quiet. And in that silence, James stayed, not to fix it, not to speak for her, but to be there, because sometimes presence is louder than words. In the middle of it all, James tried to reach out for help, to track down the other hands involved, the ones who helped Diep's father build this web. He called Fat, an old contact from darker days, someone who once knew how to make people talk. But Fat had changed, left the underworld, built a new life, and wanted no part of old shadows. James understood, and he didn't press. Instead, he started collecting proof the right way, document by document, file by file, building a case that would not collapse under pressure. He didn't care about revenge. He cared about closure, for the people who had been hurt, for the ones still being lied to, for Diep. And then came the firelight. One evening, when everything felt like it was spinning out of control, James brought over dinner. Nothing fancy, just fresh seafood, things he knew Diep liked. They cooked outside, no lights, just flame. The crackle of burning charcoal and the scent of grilled shrimp filled the quiet spaces between them. They didn't talk about the investigation, the court dates, or the names that kept haunting her inbox. They talked about small things, about what she used to love as a child, about the sound of the rain on a metal roof, about a song her mother once sang, though she wasn't sure if the memory was real or imagined. James didn't try to pull her out of the darkness. He just sat with her in it. And when she finally looked at him, he didn't need to say a word. She already knew. But beneath that peaceful moment, the storm wasn't over. The damage hadn't finished spreading. The truth was still peeling back, layer by painful layer. And James, steady as ever, knew one thing. They hadn't reached the end. They were only standing at the edge of it. Under the thick blanket of night, Diep sat alone, her eyes transfixed on the shattered remains of James's old phone. Its screen spiderwebbed, smeared with mud. The last physical piece of him left behind on that rain-soaked road. Everything in her screamed to move, to act. But the crushing weight of uncertainty and fear rooted her to the chair. Days had passed since James vanished without a trace. And though the world outside continued its relentless march forward, Diep's life had frozen in that singular moment. She could still see the last flash of his smile, could still hear the sound of his footsteps before the storm swallowed everything. As whispers and rumors bloomed like weeds in their quiet neighborhood, Diep found herself locked in a silent war between hope and despair. The police investigation had yielded nothing but dead ends and vague theories, none of which offered any true answers. Each night, she returned to their home, and each night it felt more like a grave. But then something shifted. One early morning, when the sky was still bruised from the remnants of night, she found an envelope shoved beneath her door. No address, no stamp. Inside, a single photograph. James, bound and unconscious, a dim light casting long shadows on a damp concrete wall behind him. Her breath hitched. It was real. He was alive, but it was also a message, a threat, and perhaps a game. Her instinct screamed not to trust the authorities, and so she didn't. Instead, she turned inward, combing through everything James had worked on recently, looking for enemies, clues, anything. He had been working on a private investigation of his own, something he hadn't told her about. In his locked drawer, hidden beneath old case files, she found a journal. The last few pages had been torn out violently, but what remained told a story of paranoia, of secrets James had unearthed, and of a name he had written several times. Vu. Diep didn't recognize the name, but it was underlined, circled, obsessed over. She traced James's footsteps backward, seeking every name mentioned in the journal. One by one, she found people too afraid to talk, or too dead to speak. That was the first time she was followed. A black car, idling across the street. A silhouette in her rearview mirror. Diep felt eyes watching her, always just out of sight. Still, she pressed forward, guided by the belief that if James was fighting in the dark, then she would too. Her search brought her to an abandoned motel on the outskirts of the city. Once a hotspot for shady deals, now reduced to rot and silence. Inside, she discovered evidence James had stayed there weeks before his disappearance. Old receipts, photos marked with red circles, and surveillance notes on people she'd never seen before. But one face kept reappearing. A man with a serpent tattoo running up his neck. That same night, someone broke into her apartment. Not to steal, but to search. Every drawer opened, papers scattered, photos ripped from frames. They were looking for something. But Diep had already hidden James's journal at her office under a false drawer. She was always one step ahead, or so she thought. The next day, she received a second message. A short video file sent to an untraceable burner phone left in her mailbox. The video showed James, still alive, but thinner, paler. He was being kept somewhere underground. No words, just the sound of dripping water and James's shallow breathing. She noticed a flickering light in the corner of the frame, and beside it, the faint buzz of neon. It was a clue. Diep brought the video to a former colleague of James, a tech specialist who owed him a favor. He enhanced the video, filtered the background audio, and isolated the hum of a neon sign. It matched a specific frequency used by older signs in the industrial district, a run-down part of town abandoned after the factories closed. Diep's hunt narrowed, but so did the danger. That night, she was attacked in her car, dragged from the driver's seat and warned, in a voice slick with menace, to stop digging if she wanted to see James again. She didn't stop. Bloodied and bruised, she returned to the one person James had always trusted. His childhood friend Quang, now a private investigator who operated in the shadows. Quang had access to things Diep didn't. Underground networks, informants, digital forensics. Together, they scoured the industrial district, checking every derelict building with a working neon sign. It was the third warehouse they found it. The same flickering light, the same buzz. Diep's heart pounded in her ears as she and Quang approached the rusted structure, armed with nothing but a camera and the will to survive. Inside, it was dark, the air thick with mold and secrets. But what they found wasn't James. It was something else. A room, empty but staged. Photos of James, of Diep, pinned to the walls like trophies. A table covered in surveillance logs. And in the center, another phone. This time, it rang. When she picked up, the voice on the other end was distorted but unmistakably smug. "You're getting close," it said. "But are you ready for the truth?" Before she could speak, the line went dead. The building erupted in flames moments later. Diep and Quang barely escaped, their evidence lost in the inferno. But now she knew. This wasn't just a random kidnapping. James had discovered something someone desperately wanted to keep buried. Something dangerous. Something worth killing for. Quang traced the serpent tattoo to an underground syndicate known as the Veil, a shadow organization embedded deep in the city's underworld. James had apparently uncovered their trafficking routes, and before he could expose them, he vanished. Diep now had a name, a face, and a target. And with Quang at her side, she was ready to walk into the darkest corners of the city to bring James home. But as they delved deeper, one terrifying truth began to emerge. The betrayal hadn't come from strangers. It had come from someone within their circle. Someone James had trusted. Someone who still walked free. And that's when Diep received the third message. A photo, once again slid under her door. This time, it was of her, sleeping. The caption read, "You're next." The wind whispered secrets through the trees as James walked alone through the abandoned corridor of the decrepit hospital. every footstep echoing like a ghost of the past. Time had warped inside these walls. Every corner held memories he didn't know he possessed. Every flickering light reminded him that not everything buried stays dead. Diep was out there, somewhere, and he could feel it, like a phantom limb, a piece of his soul reaching out. But the question that clawed at his sanity wasn't whether she was alive. It was why everyone insisted she had never existed. He had a name, a face. Even the scent of her hair burned into his mind. Yet records were erased, her phone disconnected, and the one friend he thought he could trust had vanished too. Someone didn't just want her gone. They wanted her erased from existence. After decoding the last piece of the photo she had left behind, James had found the symbol again, etched in red near the hospital's underground wing, the very place where patients were rumored to have been experimented on decades ago, before a fire swept through, killing dozens. Officially, unofficially, people said something survived, something unnatural. James wasn't here to chase ghosts. He was here to pull Diep back from whatever nightmare had swallowed her. But as the elevator doors groaned shut behind him, descending into the sublevels that weren't on any blueprint, the hairs on his arms rose. Darkness lived here. Not the kind you escape by lighting a candle, but the kind that whispers your name and knows your fears. His flashlight sputtered, barely cutting through the thick, damp air. The deeper he walked, the more distorted everything became. Sound bent around him. His own breath echoed like someone else's, and then he saw it. A hallway lined with patient doors, numbered in reverse, ending at a room marked 0. Inside, he found a wall covered in photographs, hundreds of them, faces scratched out, names torn off, except one, Diep's. But it wasn't just one photo. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, showing her in different times, different places, always alone, always watching. Someone had been tracking her, obsessively. And then he noticed the surgical table, still stained, the restraints, the claw marks. But it wasn't the room that chilled him. It was the message scrawled in blood on the ceiling. She never left. Behind him, a sound, not footsteps, breathing, slow, heavy, wrong. He spun, but no one was there. The photos were gone. So was the table. He wasn't in the same room anymore. It had shifted. Subtly, the door he came through now led to stairs, and he had no choice but to climb. At the top, a woman stood in the doorway, her face hidden beneath long black hair, her arm bent at an unnatural angle. "James," she whispered, voice like cracking ice. "She called you." He ran, through hallways that bled into each other, through memories that weren't his. He wasn't escaping. He was being herded. Every turn felt orchestrated. And when he finally collapsed, gasping, he realized he had returned to his own apartment. But something was wrong. The calendar on the wall said 2017. The TV flickered static. On the kitchen table, his badge, clean, untarnished, as if he had never disappeared. As if the last 6 years had been erased. A news report flashed on screen. A woman missing. Her name? Diep. Except the photo wasn't the one he remembered. It was her, but older, different, as if she had gone on living without him. He picked up the phone, dialed her old number. A voice answered, "You shouldn't have come back." The line went dead. James stared into the mirror, but the reflection wasn't his. It was someone else, wearing his face, smiling. Behind him, the door opened slowly, and the figure from the hospital walked in, no longer hiding. It was him, another James, and he spoke. "She chose me." Everything splintered. Memories, time, reality. The world he knew cracked open like glass under pressure. And for a moment, James wasn't sure if he had ever existed. But his grief was real. His rage, his love. And that meant something. That meant he could still fight. He lunged at the other self, but the figure vanished, laughter echoing as the room dissolved into darkness. James awoke in a chamber, cold, underground. Diep was lying next to him, unconscious, hooked to wires. He tried to scream, but no sound came. Machines pulsed. Faces watched from behind glass. Faces he thought he recognized but couldn't name. They weren't testing them. They were copying them, erasing them, replacing them. That was the plan. Not death, but substitution. Someone didn't want the truth buried. They wanted a new truth written, one where James and Diep never resisted, never asked questions, just faded. But they made one mistake. They left James alive. And as alarms began to blare and the lights flickered red, he knew this was their last chance. He ripped the wires out, lifted Diep, carried her through flames, through collapsing walls, through every trap laid to keep them in. And when the door finally burst open and they fell into the night, gasping, bloodied but together, James looked up at the stars and knew he would never stop running, because they weren't safe. Not yet, but they were free. For now. And that had to count for something.